Hello boys and girls, well, to be exact, 94.3% boys and 5.4% girls. Welcome back to Ushanka Show, stories about life in the Soviet Union. In today's video, we're gonna continue flipping through the pages of the book Black on Red, My 44 Years Inside the Soviet Union by Robert Robinson. This video is part 20, and if you're new to my channel, I have a separate playlist, Black on Red, and you can start from the video number 1. But before we begin, I would like to mention something. So, a lot of people on social media like Instagram and so on, they call themselves influencers. And I never like that word because it's like, what do you influence? Like, just because you're posting, pretty pictures of yourselves or how you cook, somehow you influence other people. But I realized I became influencer by making these videos about the book because price for Black on Red skyrocketed since this video started coming out. The latest price on Amazon, and it's of course used book because it was published first time back in 1988, is $162. On eBay, it's $150. And when I started making videos on this book, and I got it as a present from one of my viewers, the price on Amazon was, I think, like $35, $40. So apparently, I did influence the price for this book, and I'm very sorry. And a quick refresher before we start. So Robert Robertson, African-American, born in Jamaica in 1906. He was a toolmaker, engineer by his education. He started working in Detroit for Ford, but he couldn't become an engineer there because of the color of his skin. So in 1930, he arrived to Soviet Russia at the age of 23 to start working for Stalingrad tractor factory. In the previous video, we learned how Robert Robertson experienced Soviet people excitement because Soviet Union managed to go to space first before United States and launched the first artificial Earth satellite called Sputnik 1 back in October 1957, and how Robert Robertson was actually harassed with the Sputnik beep, beep, beep sounds everywhere he went in Moscow. So that was Sputnik time, and now it's Explorer 1 time. So Robert Robertson says, the following year, the Soviet bubble burst. Not much was said over Radio Moscow when the United States launched its first satellite. There were only a few lines buried in the newscast, but the Soviet people were stunned. The official propaganda had led them to believe that it would take the US 6, 8, or even 10 years to duplicate what Soviet scientists had done, and by that time the Soviet space program would have embarked on more sophisticated extraterrestrial exploration. So here Robert Robertson was talking about events of February 1st, 1958, when the United States launched its first satellite called Explorer 1. And I have to agree here with Comrade Robinson. I also believed for many years the Soviet Union was so much ahead of the United States in space exploration. They just never mentioned how close Americans were in launching their own satellite, launching their own man in space. All we knew, we were first in space with Sputnik, we were first in space with Yuriy Gagarin, we had the first woman in space, Valentina Tereshkova, we had first spacewalk, we had first space station. So first was always Soviet Union, but the United States wasn't far behind. And then some genius at NASA came up with the idea to hire Hollywood special effect people to help with American moon landing, and after that, Soviet achievements didn't look impressive at all. Just kidding. Okay, so let's go back to the book and see what was going on in Moscow on February 1st, 1958. The day we heard of America's Explorer 1, the workers in my shop were like a people in mourning. I was amazed at how suddenly and thoroughly their mood could change. Minutes after we heard the news, their cockiness disappeared and they became listless and were almost in tears. No more beep beeps from this group, I figured. A few die-hard party members were spreading a rumor that the American space claim was a hoax, but the rumor did not catch on. One party member who held a high rank in the factory hierarchy approached me, looked over his shoulder and whispered, "Comrade Robertson, I just cannot understand why they lied to us so grossly." Just after lunch, another party member sought me out and said, it just doesn't make sense. We were assured of one thing, and here we are witnessing the opposite. The Americans were only a few months behind us all the time. He shook his head and paused, perhaps to gain courage, and added, "Why do they treat us like that?" 3 days later, when I arrived at work, it seemed as if the Kremlin had adjusted its propaganda message successfully to reflect this new development. I noticed that the workers were no longer downcast. One of them approached me and said, "Comrade Robinson, how was it possible for a country like the United States to send a tiny orange into space and fool the whole world into believing that it too had accomplished what we had done 3 months ago? As tricky as they are, the United States can't fool us, the Soviet people." You know, it's kind of funny, but in my previous video, I repeated that Kremlin propaganda message because I also was talking about size of the orange satellite the Americans were planning to launch only in 1980, but they had to speed it up due to the space race with Soviet Union. Shame on me. And poor Comrade Robinson replied, "Comrades, I think that you are being unjust towards me. I've been among you for more than 25 years. I even labored, went hungry, and slept in wooden shelters with you during the Second World War. I never left the Soviet Union except to visit my mother one time in the 1930s. Why do you want to attack me for what the United States does or doesn't do?" To which he got a reply, "Comrade Robinson, we agree that you have been among us for a long time, but we have not forgotten, and we are sure you have not either, that you are not Russian and were not born here. I think it is natural that you feel closer to the United States than to us." Robert Robertson continues, "It made no difference that I was a citizen of their country, paid taxes, was a fellow Union members, and had never spoken harshly of the Soviet Union nor highly praised of the United States. To them, I not only remained a foreigner, who by custom and instinct must be distrusted, but I also represented the United States." And then he added, "Years later, I was told by a reliable source that when Khrushchev was briefed about the U.S. satellite launch and was told it was a small object, he laughed and exclaimed, 'Oh, but it is no larger than apelsinchik, tiny orange.' Khrushchev remarks were shared with the government propaganda office and it went to be spread all over the country. So the tiny orange jokes were created. Cartoons appeared in the factory newspapers. Sputnik 1 had lifted the spirits of the people, and the Kremlin leadership was loath to see the people become demoralized. A brooding, pessimistic people would be less productive and more susceptible to counter-revolutionary thinking. Therefore, the American space effort was made to appear as meaningless, inconsequential challenge to the Soviet effort." So here, Comrade Robertson's words kind of echoes what I said, I think in my last video, that, there's only several ways you can make people to work hard. You can't pay them according to their effort because that's capitalist way. So you can make them work out of fear. This is what Stalin did. Or make them work hard out of pride when you give them pride. And that's what Nikita Khrushchev had attempted, to give people pride in achievements of their motherland. Here comes the interesting part. Imagine, therefore, the excitement on April 12, 1961, when Radio Moscow announced that the Russian pilot Yuri Gagarin, well, not Russian pilot, but Russian cosmonaut, Yuri Gagarin had just become the first man ever to journey into outer space. No one could work in my shop. The workers exploded with joy. They jumped on each other, hugged each other, laughed, cried, and danced around their machines. Following the announcement of Gagarin's feat, we were called to the usual meetings to hear the usual speeches extolling the virtues of social system and the death of capitalism. Banners appeared everywhere and Russians got drunk. Khrushchev boasted in a radio broadcast, "We are in the lead in space and we are determined to stay in that position. Whenever the Americans land on moon, we shall already be first. We will be welcoming them, and according to our ancient custom, will be pleased to offer them bread and salt." Ha ha ha. About a month later, in May 1961, America launched Alan Shepard into space. Although the Kremlin issued a few official words of praise, the average Russian ridiculed the American accomplishment. After all, Shepard had not circled the Earth like Gagarin. My fellow workers believed that the US was a very long way behind the Soviet space program and doubted that it could ever catch up. So once again, as much as I was interested in space exploration, I never knew that Americans were so close behind. So we have April 12th, Yuri Gagarin, and May, Alan Shepard. But you know what is the biggest difference between Gagarin's flight and Alan Shepard's flight? Alan took photos from the orbit. Yuri Gagarin never took a single picture, which brings me to the question, was he for real in space? Because this is kind of like the thing you should do to prove that you were in space is to take a picture from the orbit, and the Soviets never bothered to send a camera with Yuri Gagarin, which is really strange and suspicious. So Yuri Gagarin took no pictures while he was in space, and then he died only 7 years later together with another pilot during routine training flight, and information about that crash was classified for a long time, and it still looks very strange. It's almost like someone wanted to remove the witness. Okay, so we're almost done with the space race story. The ultimate day of reckoning came on July 21st, 1969. I was vacationing at home of rest, 38 miles from Moscow. And the guy walked into the dining hall and he looked downcast, so I expected bad news. Perhaps a member of Politburo had died. Instead, he announced, "Comrades, I have an important announcement to make. 2 American cosmonauts, so we call them cosmonauti, not astronauts, have landed on the moon and are still there." And now the fun part, it's the reaction of the Soviet people. All 270-odd guests were dumbstruck. They sat without moving. No one said a thing. Everyone's porridge, bread and butter, and coffee was untouched. 3 women at my table began to cry. The silence was broken by the man to my left, who whispered, "The devil take it." A man at nearby table asked rhetorically, "But how could that have happened?" Other one said, "Son of the bitch, it's difficult to believe." So here we go. There is the reaction of Soviet people when they learned about American moon landing. That's hilarious. So when Robert Robertson returned to Moscow, the city seemed even grayer and more solemn than usual. So one of his friends told him, "Bob, everyone was totally shocked at the news. They simply could not believe it because we had been told by our leadership that we were far ahead of the Americans in space technology. Remember that Khrushchev had predicted that we would reach the moon first. People believed him, and we were not prepared for what happened. This is a terrible blow to all of us." You see, America, this is what you did to poor Soviet people by winning the space race. So many hard feelings, so many broken hearts. Shame on you, America. Just kidding. Alright, well, we're done with space race. I hope you enjoyed this story. As always, don't forget to like this video and maybe share with your friends. And we'll talk to you soon. До свидания. Goodbye.